Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in to today's second video. We're going to do the third autumn 2021 update for today's second video. So here we go again. It's Sunday morning. It's time to bring you some more autumn data. Quite a big update, quite an important update this week. We're going to be looking at solar data in terms of autumns and the solar cycles. More about that in a second. Just say that the first video released today was our 7 a.m. Forecast. We've also got GavsWeatherVids Sunny Roundup coming up for you just after lunch, and we'll be live streaming from 6 p.m. It's a Sunny live stream, so we've got to do some long range. We'll show you some CFS data. It'll be a bit of a CFS special. That will be coming up for you later on. This evening at 6 p.m, so I'll see you live there. Just say it's going to be quite a long video, this, as well as with the long range stuff, so if you can't watch it all in go, then don't worry, you will be able to watch the video on demand. It's going to be placed within the Autumn Updates playlist that you can now access on the GavsWeatherVids YouTube homepage, so you can come back and watch the video on demand whenever you would like to do that here at the GavsWeatherVids YouTube channel. Thank you so much, everybody, for doing that. Please like, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, let us know in the comments what you think. I've got to say thank you so much to Terry. Terry Scully has sorted out all of the relevant years for this one. So big thanks to Michael Brain. Terry, as ever, thank you so much, Terry, for getting all of these years together for me. And yeah, absolutely amazing. So thank you so much, Terry, for all of the help on this one. Right, so shall we do it then? Let's do it, shall we? So I'll turn off the webcam, and we're going to have a look at the solar disk on our side of this today from solarham.net. So you have got a sunspot region here in the far southeastern limb of the solar disk as you are looking at it. Otherwise, there's not much happening on the solar disk. Solar activity is actually at very low levels. Now, we are now into the second year. I'll turn the webcam back on. Big thanks to solarham.net for supplying that lovely chart. So we are now into the second year of solar cycle number 25. We're kind of like 18 months in, but this is like year number 2. 2021 is year number 2 for solar cycle 25. So we're quite a way into a solar cycle now. So, we're looking at autumns that are coinciding around this period within their relevant solar cycles. Now, sometimes that will just be one autumn of the solar cycle. Sometimes we've got like an overlap in the middle of the year between solar cycles. Then that can encompass 2 years, if you see what I mean. So some of the analogs that you see will be like the year 1, year 2, or I suppose it'll actually be like year 2, year 3, really, of the solar cycles, depending on when the solar minimums, and beginning of the next solar cycle began. You see what I mean? Otherwise, the other years will be just like one single year within the solar cycle. I'll talk you through it as we get through it, but here we go. Let's do this then. So we're going to start off with autumn 1844. So this is the first year Terry's picked out for us, but it's relevant for our point of the solar cycle number 25, where we currently are. So this one looks like quite a cold autumn with blocking to our north and below average heights, low pressure tend to be to the south, and that leaves us bringing in an easterly wind. So quite a cool, maybe quite cold autumn, that one. We're going to say blocking in the north and low pressure down to the south. Transitory season, so if you get that kind of setup in September, it's not going to be overly cold. You get that kind of setup in November, though, that could actually be quite a cold scenario. Our next autumn is 1845. Now, this one has low pressure to our west and high pressure is to our east, and so we're dragging up like a very mild or even quite warm sort of southerly southwesterly wind. So that's a much milder autumn. Could be quite uncertain. That's a deep trough of low pressure that's in the Atlantic, but that that autumn for that part of the solar cycle that's relevant to where we currently are in our solar cycle 25 looks generally quite warm, but also potentially quite wet. We move on to the autumn of 1857. So this one is anticyclonic autumn with high pressure. Let's change the colour. High pressure sitting over and to the north of the country, with low pressure tending to be further southwards. So this is a high pressure dominated sort of autumn. again, as it's a transitory season, that could be like quite warm in September. That's how it comes off in September. You could have like a late summer September song. If that comes off in November, that's going to be really quite cold, of course, because you bring the air in from off the continent. And bear in mind, this is a very long time ago, back in the middle of the Victorian era. So you would get lots of fog and that sort of thing through the autumn around that time. So that's probably quite a cold autumn from that anticyclonic sort of signal. Then we skip on to the next solar cycle, which is going to be 1868. So this one, autumn 1868, following a hot summer though, by the way, has high pressure to the north and low pressure to the south. So a little bit of a theme here already with blocking like to the north. This would tend to bring wind in from the east. So probably quite a dry autumn again. The Atlantic is blocked off. I wouldn't think it's overly wet. After a hot and dry summer, a long hot summer, we're probably going to a relatively dry but quite cool autumn with winds in from the east. We skip on to the next solar cycle, and this one is going to be 1880, the autumn of 1880. Looks cold and wet. It's got blocking around Greenland. It's got low pressure coming in from off the Atlantic and across northern Europe as well. Jet stream is pushed southwards, quite a long way south actually. And we're bringing him in from the north and from the northeast. So quite a cold and wet autumn for 1880 with blocking over Greenland and a big area of low pressure across northern and western Europe. Move on to the next solar cycle, 1891. This just looks like a very, very wet autumn. Look at this one. Again, relevant for the part of the solar cycle we are currently in. And this looks very wet with deep low pressure over and to west of the country, high pressure across northern and some central parts of Europe as well. Winds are coming up from a southerly to southwesterly direction, very mild autumn, but also a really wet autumn as well, warm and wet for the autumn of 1891. The next autumn is going to be 1903. So it's like an autumn 1903. This one is, again, really unsettled, low pressure over top of the country, coming in off the Atlantic. It's a little bit of a northern blocking signal, but it's relatively weak. So I think it's quite a mild autumn, quite westerly Atlantic driven, but also pretty wet. It does follow on from a very wet summer as well, of course. Move on to the next solar cycle. We're at 1914 now, the autumn of 1914 looks like this, with high pressure just generally sitting quite close to the coast. So I imagine that's quite a dry autumn, and probably quite a mild or even relatively warm autumn as well, with winds coming in from like a southwesterly direction. So I should imagine that's a pretty warm autumn that we've got going on there, but also relatively dry. This is like a double, 2-year solar cycle match. So then the next autumn is 1915. This one contains a very, very cold November. And you can see the reason why. It has masses of northern blocking around Greenland and in the Arctic as well, with deep low pressure over southern and southern parts of Europe. So winds are in from the east and from the northeast. Very cold November. As I say, and overall a really strong blocking signal, so a cold autumn there for 1915. Right, move on to the next solar cycle. It's 1924, so this one has low pressure again over and to the west of the country. High pressure is to our east, jet stream doing something a little bit like that. So the autumn of 1924 looks warm and wet, mild and wet autumn in 1924. Our next solar cycle autumn is 1925. So this one also looks very unsettled. A little bit more in way of blocking though in the Atlantic, mid-Atlantic ridge going up towards Greenland, with low pressure over northern and western parts of Europe. That would bring the wind in to like a northeasterly direction. So a cool, maybe quite chilly, maybe quite cold autumn, but also a wet autumn in 1925. Very unsettled, that one. Moving on to the next solar cycle, it's autumn of 1934. This one, again, with low pressure around Iceland. High pressure is pulled out into the middle of the Atlantic. We're bringing the wind from a westerly direction. Generally wet and unsettled Atlantic-driven autumn in 1934. Probably quite a cool autumn as well, as we line the jet stream and wind flow on a northwest-southeast trajectory. 1935 looks even more unsettled, with a deep area of low pressure centered right over top of the country. No getting away from that one. That is a really wet autumn that we have there, with deep low pressure over the UK and over Western Europe as well. Our next autumn is 1945, with high pressure sitting over and to the north of the country. Winds are in from an easterly direction, so mainly dry in the autumn of 1945, and quite a warm autumn as well, really, with that one. So that's a much more anticyclonic, dry and pretty warm autumn that we have going on in 1945. We skip on to the next cycle, which is going to be 1955. This one's showing up quite a bit in the analogues at the moment. This one is a dry autumn. It's like a continuation of the summer. Very extended summer in 1955. It begins, you know, in the spring. It begins in like April and May. Starts turning warmer and drier, and just goes on really through to the autumn. So very extended summer, lots of dry and warm weather through the summer of 1955, hot dry summer, and then it goes on into the autumn of 1955 as well, albeit cooling down, of course, because we're going from summer to autumn, but generally it's a mild, warm and dry autumn in 1955. The same can't be said for 1966. It's a very wet autumn with deep low pressure across northern and western parts of Europe. It has high pressure pulled out into the middle of the Atlantic, a jet stream wind flow doing something a little bit like that. So that's a very wet autumn that we have in 1966, as part of a very wet year as well. Of course, it includes the Aberfan disaster in Wales, where there's a mudslide but buries a school, and unfortunately, you know, there was loss of life with that. So yeah, that's a very nasty disaster that happened in 1966, partly down to what was a very wet year and also a very wet autumn as well. We've got 1977, so we move on to an exocycle. So this one is a mild autumn, and also quite an unsettled autumn as well, with low pressure to the north and high pressure to the south, and that leads us to bring in the wind from a westerly direction. So a mild and wet autumn in 1977. This is like a double, 2-year solar cycle match. So the next year is 1978, completely reversed in terms of precipitation. Anyway, it is another warm autumn, but very dry with this autumn. All the low pressure is pushed off up to the north. We get this big area of high pressure sitting over the UK and Western Europe as well. So this is a very dry autumn and a warm autumn as well, actually, until like the final week of November. And the final week of November turns much colder suddenly. And of course, that sets up a very cold pattern for the winter of 1978, 1979. But there's absolutely no sign of that cold winter in the autumn of 1978. It's interesting, isn't it? No sign whatsoever. It was blocking in the summer of 1978. You'll remember from our summer updates when 1978 disappeared. But in the autumn of 1978, there's no blocking at all on our side of the pole. You would look at that and think we're probably going to have a very mild winter, wouldn't you? With, like west-southwesterlies and high pressure dominating from the Azores and whatnot. But it flipped in the winter. The blocking reappeared. Anyway, the autumn of 1978 is a dry and warm autumn. We move on to our next cycle, which takes us through to 1988. Remember, all of these autumns are relevant, been picked out by Terry as being relevant for where we are in cycle 25. So this one is a dry autumn with high pressure across many western parts of Europe. I think it does have quite an until September, and the rest of it is quite dry. It gets a little bit colder in November of 1988, which is rather wintry, but otherwise it's relatively mild and dry autumn. Moving on to next cycle, 1997. So this one with high pressure, again, this is a relatively dry and quite warm autumn, really. High pressure dominates across northern and western parts of Europe in the autumn of 1997. The thing with this one is that it's really warm and dry in September. October is interesting because it's very warm and dry in the first half, and then it gets much colder in the second half. Still dry, but much colder in the second half of October 1997 with significant overnight frost. And then November turns very wet. I remember that really well. November turns really wet in 1997, but it's also a warm, mild month. And then the last solar cycle year, autumn, for where we are in the current solar cycle, that's relevant for now, is the autumn of 2010. And we know what happened with this one, don't we? With deep low pressure over northern, central, and western Europe in combination with blocking around Greenland. It gets extremely cold in the second half of November 2010, and it sets up the December to remember, of course. And overall, the autumn of 2010 is quite a cool autumn, albeit, not overly so until the final week, 10 days of November anyway, when it does get extremely cold. But other than that, it's not a desperately cold autumn. It definitely has that blocking signal. And yeah, quite an unsettled autumn, quite mixed in September, relatively wettish sort of September. October, I think, is quite dry, but often quite cold. And then November, of course, after a mild first half, we unleash it. We unleash the beast in the second half of December 2010. Right, so shall we start putting all that together then? This is how all Septembers combined are looking for this part of the solar cycle. And we're tending to be unsettled with most of these years in September, with low pressure in off the Atlantic into northern Europe. High pressure tends to be to our south. Winds tend to be coming in from the west. So Atlantic driven, westerly, and unsettled is the broad sort of idea for September at this point in the solar cycle. October tends to be a little bit colder, a colder signal with higher pressure in the North Atlantic extending back towards Greenland, lower pressure covering northern and western parts of Europe. So we send the jet stream southwards, of course, with that. And with that mid-Atlantic ridge going up towards Greenland, it's quite a coldish sort of signal, actually, that. And unsettled as well, with winds tend to pull in from the north and from the northeast too. And then all Novembers combined are looking like this. So high pressure tends to be sitting to the north in the North Atlantic. Low pressure tends to be sitting to the south. Winds are coming in from the east. So quite cold signal, really, for a lot of those Novembers. Maybe not overly unsettled. The Atlantic is blocked. The jet stream is pushed southwards. But I think a lot of those Novembers have cold and wintry potential, actually, this point in the solar cycle. And the overall analogue for autumn is quite interesting, as it tends to have high pressure in the North Atlantic around Greenland and Iceland, and low pressure centred towards Spain and Portugal, which leaves us bringing the wind from like an easterly direction. So you'll expect quite a dryish sort of autumn overall, I think, albeit there's a wet signal for September. Quite a dryish signal overall for these autumns, but quite a cold sort of signal for these autumns. Let's just narrow things down finally to look at the years after 1950, because I had a lot of years there from the 1800s and the early 1900s, so let's take all of those out and just have a look at the years after 1950, which leaves us with 2010, 1997, 1998, 1978, 1977, 1966, and 1955. And when we do that, we get a much stronger anticyclonic signal for September. Interesting. September suddenly becomes a rather dry anticyclonic type month, probably quite warm month as well. Actually, there is deep low pressure over northern Scandinavia though, but probably brings cool and wet weather to them. But for the UK and for Ireland, actually, we revert to much more an anticyclonic signal with these Septembers in this part of the solar cycle. Still that mid-Atlantic ridge idea for October, so it doesn't make all that much difference for October. Still, again, a relatively dry signal for October after 1950 for this part of the solar cycle. But with high pressure to the North Atlantic and towards Greenland, the difference is we pull in sort of cooler winds from the north, with lower pressure tending to be going further southwards. And then all Novembers combined are looking like that, again with high pressure towards Greenland and Iceland, low pressure tend to be moving southwards into southern parts of Europe, probably pulling in the wind from more of an east or northeasterly direction. So again, for October and November, it's interesting. September flips to be drier, warmer signal, but for October and November, not all that much difference really when we take all of those years out after 1950. We still have like a dry sort of signal really overall, both for November and also for October. But also a cooler signal, particularly by the time you get through to November. Quite a coldy signal still there, still in evidence with a lot of those. Bear in mind, there are exceptions to that. We've got 1978, which is very dry for October and also for November as well. So you know, that's in line. But also got 1966, which is very wet, especially so in October. So there are exceptions, but the overall idea, I think, after 1950 for quite a dry autumn, September becomes a drier month, definitely, and still pretty dry for October and November, but becoming, you know, reverted to like a colder signal. All autumns combined finally have got an anticyclonic signal for this part of the solar cycle. Post 1950, we have above average heights, high pressure over and to the north and the west of the country, with below average heights over northern Europe. So yeah, you know, it's quite a cooler signal, bringing wind from like a northwesterly type direction, relatively dry, but quite a cold signal, especially so by the time you get through to the latter stages of these autumns. Right, that's it then. That's brought us to the end of this all-important third autumn 2021 update. Big thank you to Terry for sorting out those years for us. Thank you so much, Terry, for doing that. So that's it. Big update, this one. And will form, you know, a significant part of the autumn forecast when we come to do that. And I can tell you actually now that we will be releasing the GavsWeatherVids autumn 2021 forecast on Sunday the 29th of August. Sunday 29th of August is when we will be releasing our autumn forecast. So yeah, that's going to be exciting. We've got lots of updates to do before then. Of course, we're only at the third update, and we've got, you know, lots to get through before we get to that. But this, you know, was a significant update. Very important update, this one. They're all important, but some of them are a little bit more important than others, and this is definitely, like, along with like ENSO, QBO, whatnot, this is definitely like a very important update. Right, okay, so that's why I've been a little bit more toned down, you may have noticed, on this one. Right, okay, so that's it then, for the, what was it, the third autumn 2021 update. That's all for now. This video is now part of the playlist of the autumn updates on the GavsWeatherVids YouTube homepage, so you can watch it on demand whenever you would like to do that, and go through these years, and maybe, you know, when we get to the autumn itself, and we get to the end of the autumn, come back and have a look at this, and see what happened, you know, versus what many of these autumns were like. It'd be interesting to see. Right, so that's it for the third autumn update. We're going to be back later on with GavsWeatherVids Sunday Roundup. We're going to be live streaming from 6 PM. I shall see you live at 6. But for the third autumn 2020 update, that's all for now, and thanks for watching.